Hey NBA2K fans, in this video we're going to talk about the sim points of emphasis in your My League and My GM files and give you a couple suggestions on how you might use this feature in the coach game plan. If you are new to the channel, I am Coach 2K. If you love basketball and love NBA 2K, you're going to want to subscribe to my channel. So subscribe while you're here and click the bell to get notified whenever I upload anything new, so you don't miss a single NBA 2K video that I put out. Alright, so let's talk about the sim points of emphasis. First of all, where you'll find it in your My League and My GM files is under the coaching tab, under Coach Game Plan. So you select that and it'll bring you to this screen that allows you to set a global coaching game plan for all teams and then team specific ones. And once you go in here, you hit all teams and it'll take you to this screen, and you just tab over with your R2, L2 button if you're on the PlayStation, and it'll bring you to this screen that says Sim Points of Emphasis. Now the Sim Points of Emphasis within the coach game plan is here so you can provide some direction to your team on how it should play when you're simulating games and not when you're actually playing the games on your own. Now there are two places that you can set your sim points of emphasis. You can do it for all teams, or you can do it for each specific team. I think most people go into the all teams global setting and kind of use a one size fits all approach to the sim points of emphasis, and they approach every team the same way. However, I don't think that's probably the best way to go about using the sim points of emphasis. So while you can set these in the global game plan as kind of your default, I think it's a better idea to go into each team specifically and set up a sim points of emphasis for each specific team. And let me go in and kind of show you why. Here I am in the specific coach game plan versus the 76ers. And you can see up in the upper right here it says scout advice, tip, set limit perimeter shots for defensive focus. And yet when I go over and I look at the Cleveland Cavaliers specific coach game plan, you see the scout advice, the tip is set, protect, paint for defensive focus. And that's because these teams have different personnel, and so therefore they need a different approach, probably both on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. So one of my first suggestions would be, if you're going to be simulating games in your season, rather than just blasting through the games, before you simulate a game with a specific team, go into their specific coach game plan and kind of take a look at what you want to do as far as your approach to that specific team. The other thing that I would suggest is that you don't just set a team's sim points of emphasis and then think you have that team set up for good, because teams' personnel changes either due to injury or trade or other transactions, or from season to season. And so you're going to need to adopt your sim points of emphasis to whatever personnel is going to be playing that specific game. You got to kind of take that into account. Now when you're setting these sim points of emphasis, there's a couple of approaches you can take. One's the manual approach, where you can look at a team's roster and decide for yourself, well, these guys, we're gonna play physical with them. We're gonna limit perimeter shots, and you can decide that by looking at their personnel and just kind of take a manual approach to just deciding these on your own for each specific team that you play. A second approach you can do, and I kind of like, is you can just kind of make it a house rule inside your My League or My GM files that how your sim points of emphasis are going to be set is going to be based on the advice that your head scout gives you. If you aren't familiar with what house rules are, I did a video on house rules for your My GM and My League files, and I'll put a link to that up in the corner of the video so you can check that out if you want. But essentially, It's just kind of a restriction you put on yourself in playing the game that, the goal of which is to try and make it a little more realistic experience. Now, the reason I suggest doing it in this manner where your head scout decides what your sim points of emphasis is because within the global coach game plan here, you'll see it says scout advice, head scout Kenny Johnston, scout rating B-. And what this means is that when you see those tips inside the specific coach game plans, those tips are coming from your head scout. So one of the responsibilities of your head scout, in addition to scouting prospects that you might draft in the off season, is to prepare you for your opponents that you're playing during the season. So what's really kind of cool about doing it this way is it really just increases the importance of the head scout in the front office staff and kind of puts a greater importance on you to find a good head scout to work with your team. It can give you a reason to let a head scout go or not renew their contract. It just depends on how immersive, I suppose, you want your interactions to be with the head scout and the other members on your front office staff. So it's just kind of a way to kind of make the mode a little bit deeper if you want to take an approach like that. Now, within the sim points of emphasis, there's basically three sections: the scoring options, the offensive options, and the defensive options. And your head scout, if you choose to have them take over the responsibility, the tips they're going to give are just on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. And so that would leave these scoring options that you can decide if you want to leave neutral or if you want to focus on specific players. So what I do a lot of times is I just put my three best players in the first, second, and third scoring options. People I'd want the offense to focus on, and kind of in that order. So what that would mean is that if you have injuries or anything during the season, you're going to have to kind of pay attention to these scoring options too if you want to go in and adjust them. For example, if Oladipo got hurt like he did this past season, then obviously he wouldn't be my first scoring option. That's probably going to, I think, toggle to neutral on its own. But if you're actively going in there and actually choosing these options, you want to make sure that you update it based on who's going to be on the floor for that particular game. Now, it's just a hunch, and I don't know for sure, but it could be that these scoring options here that are put within the sim points of emphasis might have some effect on auto play calling. That's been suggested, and I suppose it's possible. It's probably more likely that the tendencies within the roster that you're working with probably control the auto play calling a little bit more, but that's another thing you might consider as something that it might affect, but I'm not really sure that it does. Now, there are a lot of people out there that want to use the sim points of emphasis to have an impact on the stats to give you more realistic stats. And I suppose that's an important goal, but I think the sim engine is so complicated that, one, I'm not sure how much of an effect these options really have. So I wouldn't probably put a lot of importance on using these sim points of emphasis to control stats. I think that's more of a roster issue than a sim points of emphasis. But who knows? It's a pretty complicated topic. So if you're in the camp where you want realistic stats, then it could be that you want to use these sim points of emphasis in a little bit different way than I suggested, to try and affect them in some way that shapes stats the way you want them to be. But me personally, that's not something that I'm interested in. I'm more interested in kind of the overall decision making of running the franchise, and that's what's important to me, more so than making sure that Oladipo has 25 points a game as opposed to maybe here, which he has just under 18, which doesn't seem too realistic to me, really. But I think it's more important to have a realistic operation that I'm running as opposed to necessarily a specific number that I'm trying to achieve, because it's complicated to figure out how to get that number, where you might want to put it. And I think it probably is more related to the roster and the way it's set up than anything else. I think it's also important to point out that just because you follow your scout's advice doesn't guarantee that you're going to win the game. The first reason is because the advice you get from your head scout is probably only as good as the scout themselves. So like my scout here has got a B- rating. Maybe an A+ rated scout would give me a better game plan, a different game plan. So that's kind of the beauty of kind of relying on your scout's advice, because again, it puts more importance on the scout and might make you think twice about the kind of scout that you're going to hire and what kind of role you want your scout to play. Another reason your scout's advice may not make a big difference is maybe your team isn't feeling so hot right now about what's going on with the franchise. Maybe your front office staff is also questioning things. So a lot of it's going to depend on what everybody's thinking in the franchise, as well as like team chemistry, which right now, like in my case, is 61%. It's going to depend on your opponent, how well they're playing. So a lot goes into whether you're going to win or lose a game based on, these sim points of emphasis. And all those same factors would apply if you set up your sim points of emphasis manually. A lot goes into it. So it's not going to guarantee a win that you go in there and you set these a certain way. All right, so what should you do? Well, in my opinion, since these are games that you're simming, you're not actually playing them, and you're really just kind of playing the role of the GM, I think it makes a lot of sense just to let the head scout follow their suggestions, let them make the recommendations, and just follow what they do and just let the chips fall where they may. And I think it just kind of provides a little more randomness to the mode, a little deeper realism to it, if you want to put it that way. So for me personally, I like letting the head scout kind of take charge of that responsibility, and I just accept the outcome of it. And then, when his contract's up, then I'll evaluate how well I think he's been doing based on the types of prospects he's scouted in the draft, and also kind of how I feel like the game plans have been playing out based on his advice. Okay, so that's my opinion on the sim points of emphasis. Let me know down in the comments what you think. How do you use the sim points of emphasis, and whether you agree or disagree with me or like my approach. And while you're here, you might check out my newest MyGM challenge, the hometown players roster. And I'll put a link to that video up in the upper left hand corner. You might want to check it out. You can see me kind of put a lot of these things into action in an actual file that I'm playing, and probably pick up some other tips too that I actually implement when I play these modes. All right, well, I am Coach 2K. I'll see you on the court in the next episode, and thanks for watching.